Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, compañeros. Good to see you all up. I guess some of you are up at dawn to see our initial passage into the canal, and it is a remarkable experience. If you haven't been through the Panama Canal before, it's sort of the drama of engineering, but in slow motion. And right now we're on the Gatun Lake, so we have a couple of hours of just cruising on the freshwater lake that is the center of the canal passage. And just by note, this ship just fits, you see, there's only so many inches on either side of the hull. So this is what they used to call the old Panamax size of a ship. Any bigger, they couldn't do it. Now you've seen the giant ships coming in the new canal locks, and we'll see them coming with us. But again, if Dr. J. Wolf didn't mention it today when he was talking, there's been such a water crisis that they're having half the number of ships pass through the canal these days as it's the dry season, and they predict, the pilot last time said that there were 9 ships in the old canal and 5 in the big, so 14 ships went through the last week when we came through, but they predict that the water will be so limited that in February they'll only have 5 ships a day because they use how much millions of gallons to wash each time, and they try to recycle the water and such, but it's a great engineering problem, especially if there's no water, and you can't just invent it. Somebody asked, why don't they just pump seawater up and fill the lake? Well, that would kill all the wildlife in the lake, ruin all of the agriculture, and also Lake Gatun is the water supply for the people of Panama, and city in particular. So it's an environmental crisis, which is hard to imagine that after 100 years of the canal being operant, then they took out $8 billion in bonds to build the new canal, but they don't have enough water to operate it. And so the whole project could easily go bankrupt. Meanwhile, a lot of the shipping companies are sending their ships around South America. Now they're avoiding the Suez Canal, so it's a general problem for the shipping industry. But we're through, and we'll be fine, and maybe it'll rain mañana. By the way, if there's anybody interested in marine engineering, I just published a research paper with the Society of Naval Architects for a new form of ship propulsion as an alternative to the screw propeller. So this is what I have been working on for years on my own, or rather with my colleagues. But anybody want to read the details, I can give you a copy of it. But today I'm talking about Colombia and Cartagena, and this is a very dramatic city, and was also one of the key cities of the Spanish Empire. They used to call this area New Granada, and they named Cartagena after Cartagena, Spain, which itself was named after Carthage, as in the empire based in Tunisia. But we'll be coming into this rather large city with whole new sections and a big lagoon, and then fortified walls around the old city. I'll talk a bit more about it. This is a sort of surprising city because you have colonial architecture, and then you have a big booming resort island. It was called Boca Grande, which was one of the entrances to the old harbor. We'll be sailing into a snug commercial port area inside the lagoon. But before I go into the talk about the city itself, I'll just show you that Colombia as a nation is quite extended, let's say. Just like Peru and Ecuador, it has the same geography of the Andes coming up in a number what they call Cordillera of the east and the west. They have a long jungle coast here which has almost no inhabitants or good harbors. Then you have the delta of the Magdalena River coming up to Cartagena right about there. A very high peak called Santa Marta right there, which I'll show you later, is the highest snow-capped mountain overlooking a Caribbean beach anywhere. And then you have the Llanos of Orinoco and also the Amazonia, which is the vast upper Amazon basin. Some of it grassland, some of it still has its rainforest cover. A lot of it gets very dry, though. So it's actually a very large country, except that it's completely inconvenient for travel in the earlier eras because everywhere you went, you had either a jungle or a mountain in the way. And so Colombia as a nation has had a very hard time feeling unified just because of the geography alone. They have the same problem in Ecuador and Peru, but Colombia has a Caribbean coast and a Pacific coast. So it has very distinct areas that are not similar in many ways. In the historical records, there were these different groups of indigenous people. Our guide yesterday said, don't call us Indians. We are not from India. We are indigenous or natives. And so you have these indigenous groups in the mountains. Up there, the Tairona were the people with a number of different subgroups who the Spanish first contacted, kindly massacred them and stole all their gold. There are remnant groups up, particularly in Santa Marta, I'll show you. So the Spanish, when they came via Columbus to the Antilles and all the islands, Columbus's second voyage came across the coast of South America, went to Panama even, and realized this is such a more vast place than ever. Imagined in their wildest navigation. Cartagena as a lagoon and area was first sighted by Vasco de Nunez, one of the sailors on the third voyage of Columbus, and he heard from the locals about the El Dorado. Now this is a kind of unbelievable story where somewhere up in the mountains the people would gather gold, make dust, and then anoint their leader, king, and cover them with gold dust. And then they would throw all their extra gold down into a deep artesian well. And so this was what the locals told Nunez and other conquistadors. El Dorado is up over the mountains. They kept sending them further down the coast. And they finally, of course, Pizarro got to Peru and really found the big piles of gold and silver. And Cartagena became the transport place over the river valleys to get this gold and silver from Peru and Bolivia back to Spain, back before they would be crossing at Panama. So the administrator back in Madrid of this new world, Marquis de Enseñari, he sent out settlement and gave a city charter to Cartagena in 1533, and this is the earliest drawing of the town, which features a clock tower that's still there. Then the town had fortifications, the Spanish Navy, garrison troops to protect this harbor. Again, there was a gateway at the Boca Chica, they call this, with a chain to keep the ship's control going out, a guard tower, then the old town up on the hill. Now this was suddenly the prey of all kinds of pirates. As soon as Cartagena was founded and the gold and silver started coming out, the English pirates and the French and the local people even would constantly attack Cartagena. So it was up to this man, Blas de Leso, to guard the city against many of these attacks. So he commissioned an architect called Sotomayor to build a multiple defense system. He was a pretty tough character. He lost a leg, he lost an arm, and he lost an eye. But he could still see what he wanted to have done in Cartagena to protect it. So again, you have the entrance and the lagoon where we'll go in. The old city was put over here. And so the galleons were safe there from the pirates and the big giant lizards that might attack. This honorable privateer, Sir Francis Drake, that Jay Wolfe talked about, came in 1580, and he attacked Cartagena with 23 ships and 3,000 men. He burned and sacked it all and then took his goods back to Queen Elizabeth on one of his many raids. But he, like others, were, let's say, after the galleons. So these are the archetypical Howard Pyle paintings, not necessarily of Drake, but just the lore and the lure of piracy inspired many a young pirate or a young sailor. And so they'd sneak up on the slow galleons, board it. They were often bigger and more ferocious than the local crew aboard, so they could overpower a large ship with a few men. And then they would take it in and go to the Spanish towns and raid them and hold them for ransom, like they're doing here in one town, pleading for mercy from the pirates. And when they gave some, then they'd hold them, torture them some more, get some more, then they'd go and divide it up. This is actually a curious point of social history because many of the pirates were actually renegades, criminals, adventurers, but within their ship and their companions, they had a sort of proto-democratic method where they would elect their captain. Everybody would get an equal share or more if they were specialized navigator or the surgeon and things like that. And then they had their own islands, famously Tortuga, north of Haiti, is where they all had their what they call liberalia, their pirate kingdom, where they bring all of their loot and such, and then they wouldn't save for their retirement. They would spend it all on wine, women, and song, which is a good strategy if you're a pirate. Well, anyway, Cartagena became the object of repeated attacks over and over again. So here is Sir Francis Drake with his ships bombarding, trying to sack the city. Later, he was attacking the coast of Panama when he came down with fevers, which was probably yellow fever, malaria. Again, many Europeans died in droves just because of the lack of prevention of disease. And so this is the fanciful burial of Sir Francis Drake in his lead coffin somewhere off the coast of Portobello, Panama. The Royal Navy and some divers have identified the wreck, and they think they've found where the coffin is. Or rather, the coffin was not in a wreck, it was dropped in the sea, just offshore. But the Royal Navy has not allowed, let's say, exhumation of Sir Francis Drake. But if you know the tale, you see the drum. His personal drum that he would use to signal on the ship was taken back to Plymouth, England, put in the cathedral along with one of his chairs, and the drum was said to sound whenever there was danger to Britain. And lastly, in World War II, the drum started making noise just before the bombers came and bombed out most of Plymouth. And then it was taken to the country where it is still to this day kept as a memorial to Sir Francis Drake. Well, again, the attacks would come in the Boca Chica, come up to the town, and so the next invader was this French nobleman who didn't want to miss out on the fun. So he came, this Baron de Ponty, he came in 1697 with 22 ships and 4,000 men, and then overwhelmed the defenses, got into the fortresses, sacked the city again. So this was just the way of the world back then. You were never really safe, even if you thought you were very well defended. So over 200 years in Cartagena, they built the largest fort in the world, which is still there, Castillo de San Felipe de Barras. And it held until it became obsolete, I'd say. It's still there. By the way, it was all made by African slaves, pretty much. And again, more attacks on Cartagena. 1741, this was Edward Vernon's fleet, which had some 50 major ships, 25,000 men who bombarded and tried to storm the city. They were not successful. This was also curious note is that the North American colonial troops coming from the English colonies were led by George Washington's brother, some 12,000 colonial troops. And of course, when it failed and the fort held, again, many people just died of disease just being there. So the toll was great. But Admiral Vernon is remembered because Lawrence Washington named Mount Vernon after his admiral. So this is what you see now. You come up to these tremendous fortifications. There's 11 kilometers just around the old city on its own. And so it was a medieval city in a sense that the government buildings and most people lived in the old town. Now it's surrounded by modern facilities, but it still has this feeling of waiting for the pirates to come. This particular ship, the San Jose, was sunk in 1709 offshore from Cartagena, and recently it was found, and these are pictures of the galleon that are on the bottom about 2,000 feet off the Colombian coast, but in Colombian territorial waters. So this has been a big dispute because a private diving firm and explorers found it, and then the Spanish government claimed it as a Spanish possession because it was a Navy ship. The Colombian government claimed it as a Colombian territorial waters, and then now they're all embroiled in a lawsuit, just like that happens with many of these gold finds in the sea. But the doubloons are down there. If anybody wants to go for a little swim, maybe we'll find some off the beach there. Because this is what drove Europe mad. Columbus himself told Queen Isabella, Indian gold will make Europe crazy, basically, which is what happened. It changed the economy, it changed everybody's motivations. But these are some archaeological digs recently finding some of the golden goods that were not melted down into doubloons. And so there's a sense of design and mystery to some of these objects. Now there's like we had in Lima, there's a museum of gold in Bogota. There's a museum of emeralds in Cartagena. That's the other product. But these are just some of the artifacts that have been found in recent years in other tombs and other excavations. The problem is that we don't have any written records, and the Spanish were very, let's say, destructive of any information of the indigenous people, and particularly shocked by some of the designs. Now, she looks like the original golden Barbie. But emeralds are the treasure of Colombia. Now they have emerald mines in a number of parts of the mountains, and so Robin and I went to the Emerald Museum in Cartagena. There's one in the Old Town, there's another one in the resort area called Boca Grande. But this is one of their little displays of a rather big chunk of the raw material. And this was worshipped by the local people, this kind of crystalline, luscious stone. And this is a point when the Spanish came to the Tewa people, and they confiscated, then they broke their emerald icons. This is in the museum, that they had crystalline emerald and quartz probably, and this was completely destroyed by the Spanish or taken away and turned into other jewelry. But again, at the Museum of Gold, you can see the kind of the elaborate design and delicacy of some of this ancient handiwork. And then it turned into decoration for, above all, altars and churches in Colombia and Spain. And then the colonial period, of course, had its problems with the natives, and then bringing in Africans to work the land. They used to call them macheteros. They would be there just to clear the forest. So this is Peter Cabet, the patron saint of Cartagena, who ministered to the natives and the Africans who were brought in. So Cartagena became a major port, and particularly for slave trade. But the religion goes on. These are a couple of chapels that are up at the upland above Cartagena. This one in particular is perched on a gorge. And so once the land was, let's say, settled and pacified, the Criolla culture of mestizo, intermixing with some of the natives and having Spanish heritage, but native people, or Colombians, we'll call them now, they had they generally never went back to their homeland in Spain. They became Colombians, or in this case, New Grenadians. When the forces of Napoleon came and invaded Spain in 1805, they captured Charles VI, the king. Then the Spanish Empire essentially fell apart. And it was up to the colonialists like Simón Bolívar to declare independence, just like the United States had, from the monarchy back in Europe. And so Bolívar led battles all over Colombia, Venezuela, to finally rout and convince the loyalists, of which there were not many actually, to just give up and then create a new country. So this is where the land of Gran Colombia, they called it. So with liberty and order as their beacon. And back then, Colombia included Panama up to Nicaragua. So the new country, as we have it now, has these rather border delineations, which seem somewhat arbitrary, but this was the matter of contention all through South America. Well, we'll be free. They wanted to make a United States of South America, but again, the geography precluded it because of all of the mountains and jungles, and so Colombia as a nation kept changing its borders, and even now there are disputes about it, particularly up in the area about La Guaira Peninsula, Lake Maracaibo. And so they've had negotiations and conflicts and this sort of diplomatic chess for quite a while. But again, in olden days, the Colombians claimed, first of all, Panama, and then most of Central America. Well, now it's all settled for now, but Colombia still is a kind of a curious country. You see, the red is the population center. There's Bogota, the capital, and the biggest city. Then you have Medellin there, Cali. Cartagena is about the fifth largest city. But again, the road systems and the river systems make it many isolated places. And then in the east, in the Amazonia up to the Orinoco, it's a number of indigenous groups, but not very much settlement. Well, we're not going to go there. I'm going to show you things you can't see on our short visit here, but here's the capital of Bogota with the central government, the assembly, the parliament, the Palace of Justice, the Supreme Court of the country. This one is a new memorial to all of the victims of the recent Civil War, which went on for almost 50 years and had a toll of some 200,000 people fighting all over the country, including up around here. And some 80,000 disappeared, desaparecidos, who are remembered here. So that's the recent trouble of the country that has now, let's say, gathered its cohesion and its economy. It's actually doing much better now that it's not fighting with itself. So again, in Bogota, the big city in the valley, Medellin, which is down in the lower valley, Barranquilla, which is up on the Caribbean coast again. So there's a high degree of urban culture, industry, education. But when you come here as a visitor, what you really want to go see is the countryside. There are all this haciendas and cattle ranching and plantations of bananas, and there's a pretty lush tropical life, particularly where we are going. Now, when we get off the ship, we go through a welcome to Cartagena de Indias. They always say de Indias to distinguish from Cartagena in Spain. So here, macaws greeting you as you come off the ship. And so this is something that I think was built by either Carnival or Royal Caribbean, so they get their big ships coming down from Florida, and then they have a day here. But when you get off the ship, rather than being in a bunch of container port facilities there next door to it, you have a little garden park full of birds. So you're suddenly walking into an aviary. Then one of the excursions tomorrow, or the next day, is to go out to the larger aviary bird center, research center outside of Cartagena, where they have these quite fantastic structures, and there are birds everywhere. Some of them netted, some of them free, flying around. But they're full of curious toucans that'll come and nibble on your shoe. More guacamaya. When I was in my paseo, hitchhiking, backpacking through here, once upon a time, I picked up one of these birds that had been injured, had its wings clipped, and they're beautiful to look at, but you don't want to get too close because they'll bite your finger off. And I was lucky to not lose a finger, but they're very noisy. That's the other thing. You know, a lot of squawking going on in this aviary. This is kind of a original kind of a turkey. Turkey being a wild bird originally, and then different hawkbill cranes, lots of birds, spoonbill flamencos, and then a very large herd of flamencos, which, what does one flamenco say to the other? How are you feeling? Oh, I'm in the pink. Isn't that where the phrase comes from? Anyway, they're the sort of the iconic bird of the Caribbean all around. And we have this a kind of a piercing-eyed owl that happened to be awake in the day. And this caracata, kind of a hawk that is common in the mountains. And then some things don't fly, like the iguana, who may look ferocious, but they are vegetarian. Then right off the dock, also in this place, they had anteaters. So this, when we get off in Cartagena, you can see old Big Nose there wandering around amongst all the birds. Well, Cartagena is, on the one hand, an old historic town, but it's also a beach resort. So they have this Boca Grande, and then other beautiful Caribbean beaches are out just right off the old town. And again, on our city tour, you can go for a swim this is on the lagoon side. And so Cartagena is sort of known for many other Colombians come from the mountains or the interior to come and have a holiday. But Colombia is also noted as a very literary country. If you're a student of Spanish, it's considered the Spanish spoken in Colombia is the clearest to understand versus the way they speak in either Madrid or Puerto Rico or Cuba or wherever. So they pride themselves in their literature, and their leading writer for this century has been Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is passed on now, but his writings, 100 Years of Solitude and other what they call tropicalia or fantasy books about the life in Colombia is very resonant to this country, particularly since they've had such a terrible civil war between themselves. So here's a bit of graffiti on the street in Cartagena. I found that it's a saying of Marquez, says, "Cuando estoy en silencio, la mente me grita." When I am in quiet and silence, my mind cries out, even though he may not have words for what he feels, because there's been so much conflict in this country. And there's still remnant here. This was a riot in Bogota in May. And again, a lot of agitation to try to have reconciliation in this country after so many people died or disappeared. This is, where are the disappeared? And they've had this problem in Argentina and other places where they have that kind of internal conflict. But a lot of it is driven by this industry, which is coca. And the leaves are harvested like trees, and then they're boiled down with chemicals and made into this, pack cocaine, which is still a major export for Colombia, even though it's illegal in the country and, of course, everywhere else, in its poisonous form. Coca itself, you make tea, and you can make, you can have it like they say it's like having aspirin, alcohol, and coffee all at once. But up in the highlands and when you're working, it keeps you awake and attentive, especially if you're one of these guys. If you heard the story, the Medellin drug cartel, Pablo Guzman, he had a big private zoo where he brought African hippopotami to be his pets. And then when he was captured and killed a decade or so ago, they didn't know what to do with the hippopotami. They are kind of big and they're kind of ferocious if you get near them. Now they're in the river and they don't know what to do with them. So this is the Colombian version of the cocaine bear. That's the cocaine hippo. So we won't get to visit with one. Well, anyway, the political troubles have gotten better just mainly through reconciliation and moderation of the extremes and police action to try to suppress the control of the cartels. This is the former President Juan Miguel Santos, who was doing weapons exchanges and amnesty and such, and so the country has tried to make peace amongst these factions, have some law and order as their motto, and also make good friends with the other countries, Chile, Venezuela, Mexico, Peru. So there's this alliance of the Pacific to have a common foreign policy and some more cooperation. There already is a free trade zone here. And this is the current president, Gustavo Petro, who again has been trying to have truth and reconciliation like they have done in South Africa to mend the country a bit. But they have this typical problems of politics because the son, right there, he was recently arrested for fraud and embezzlement. So I don't know. This just sort of happens in families, I guess. So this is just a symbol of trying to make peace in this country that's had a lot of trouble. But the neighborhood is also trouble with Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. They have similar colors in the flags, but you may have heard this month, Maduro sponsored a referendum of his people to annex half of Guyana next door where they have oil and timber, And this is a country that's fallen apart. There are over 2 million Venezuelans who are refugees in Colombia. So this is the trouble of the area. But I'll just go back to Cartagena, the symbol of the city, the flag you'll see around. And again, we will come in and come into the inner harbor right about there. You see, it's pretty big city, over 1 million in the large area, but it's all strung along the coast of the Caribbean and then a deep interior. There's a river coming in that was the source of the trade originally, but you can see it's grown considerably since its colonial days. Our interest to come here is to go into the old city, which is still surrounded by its fortresses. We're down off the screen here. That's the big San Felipe fort. But I believe there'll be a shuttle go right down to the main plaza and the cathedral and various buildings in the area. So it is a World Heritage Site by UNESCO just because it's stayed fairly intact in the old town while all of the new development you can see over on the left is so the concrete mushrooms. But Cartagena was a working town. It was a port. And so it still has that function for this part of Colombia. There's not that much trade on the river, but it used to be very crowded and very full of people from around the world. The Spanish kept control until the 1820s. And this building is still in the center of the Casa de Inquisición, where they would have auto de fe burning alive of heretics and criminals. They don't do that anymore, but the building's still there. And this was the original gate into the town they called the Torre de the Watchtower, and that's still there. So this is a historic site. It really does look like Spain in the tropics. But you can just wander around the town. There's a heritage tour, so you'll get quite a bit of explanation of it, but you can just go and hike around the walls or go into the cafes. It's pretty lively. It had been closed down for visitors for maybe a decade just because of the conflicts in the country, but now it's all open again. This is the statue to Columbus with his secretary, and a la heroica Cartagena, to the heroic city of Cartagena. This is the founder of the city, Pedro de Heredia. He was from Cartagena, Spain. So in 1533, he officially founded the city, and he's remembered. And you can just see there's a variety of semi-Baroque churches. This is the main cathedral, actually, but it's pretty bright for a cathedral. A lot of little lanes and houses and people, so it's a very charming town. This is the original church of the patron saint of Cartagena, Pedro Catel, and he's buried in there. So these are pretty old buildings, 1600s, about the era of those. But it's mostly just a pleasant town to visit, to walk around in. But and this this is the original air conditioning, a veranda. And the city was so prosperous, it built theaters, and for instance, this one is the Teatro de Melia. The Melia family sponsored it. And then there's the cuisine of ceviche and platanos and stews and all kinds of food. Of course, salt features all of this. You don't need to go out off the ship to find it. But one of the hometown heroes of Medellin is Fernando Botero. You might recognize. That's what happens when you have too much on a ship eventually. But he was famous for doing portraits, and he was originally from a poor son outside in the countryside, came to Cartagena, started painting these big figures for which I can't believe a family would commission a family portrait like this. Again, being skinny in South America was never in fashion, if you know what I mean. So he passed away recently, but he has in some places these. This is actually in Medellin, his sculpture garden of, well, everybody feels trimmer just visiting. But I'll just show you some scenes from Cartagena, just some of the people, because it's a very lively town. There's a lot of music and a lot of cheer. They're happy to see us. Like Panama, everybody's waving at you because they want visitors. They've had such trouble in their own society and all the bad history, they're happy to have a period of prosperity. These are some of the indigenous carvings and masks that are for sale. Again, there's a number of different groups around Cartagena itself and along the Caribbean coast, but a lot of people are mixed in. They're both Spanish, African, indigenous, Chinese, all kinds of people have come to Cartagena, and so it's a pretty happy place if you get out of the midday sun. And it has a certain elegance of the Spanish tradition and mestizo beauties like this woman. But it's a colorful place with a lot of different variety of people. And a very strong Afro-Caribbean sense. So we'll be continuing on to Jamaica, and so we'll get quite a bit more of that. But at night it sort of really lights up. That's when everybody comes out. This is Boca Grande, the resort area off the old town, the lagoon again. And so if we are there overnight, and if you want to, you can go down into the old town where some of the old clubs have live music. The Havana is famous for singers, and cumbia is the rhythm and the dance. Robin was playing some earlier. And so this is the city that had the nightlife on the beach and such that was quite different from the upland culture. And then there's endless beaches. So if you have the time to come back, there are many isolated places, offshore islands. A lot of them have been, let's say, built up fantastically because anybody with any means in interior Colombia wants a condo on the beach, even if they're not there that much. So there's a lot of construction like this in Cartagena down to Santa Marta. So a lot of it, like in Panama, looks like a new Miami and a lot of buildings. But offshore, in the Caribbean, we'll go past a few of these islands, some of which are inhabited, some of them are not. But there's a lot of nature around in Colombia and local fishing communities. And I'm going to take you to up the coast to La Guajira Peninsula, where there's still some of the traditional villages out on stilts and sailing out and fishing on their own. But at Santa Marta, where this mountain is, there's an indigenous group called the Kogi, who have this kind of conical thatched roofs. And they live both on the beach and then also up and high in the mountains. And so they come from the shore and will go all the way up the mountains as sort of their ritual trade and also livelihood with the sea and then into the mountains. So this is a part of Colombia that is up to the northeast of where we are, but has beautiful ocean and diving and such. But this is the area I'm going to finish with, Santa Marta and Sierra Nevada, the snow-capped mountain of Santa Marta, which is a range isolated from the Andes. There are lowlands all around it. And geologically, it was an uplift from tectonic plates a long time ago. But the top peak is some 5,890 meters. That's almost 19,000 feet. And so you can see there's this peak that has snow and glaciers on it. And then you go right down to the beach. So the people who live on the slopes and up on the area, they will go down to the beaches and then they'll come back, hike all the way back home. But it's quite a climb, let's say. And this whole area was closed off, made a national park, so it would not be deforested and let's say, developed too much. But it's now open again. And you go up in the rivers and then there are a few roads. But it's almost inaccessible without being a hiker and or get a boat like this to get in close to it. It's become a scene of a lot of adventure travel and, again, those who are willing to stay a bit longer and go for a swim. But the heights of it are quite dramatic because it's very steep and there are different levels of ecosystems. It goes from the lowland jungle up to the temperate forest and then up higher. And it has a number of the highest living palm trees and also this kind of a giant yucca tree, which is unique to this particular mountain range. But here's the top of the Pico de, they call it Guananaua in the local Kogi language. And these people have lived up in this area where they have ice fields and phenomena that are quite rare in the rest of the nation. To get to their reserves, they have, like the Incas did, they had rope bridges. Whenever they felt threatened, they'd just pull in their bridge, and you couldn't get to them. Now they've put them back up. During the Civil War, they closed off the whole area just for their own protection. So they have maintained their culture. They were originally, many more of them, these kind of platforms up in the mountains for their former villages. But they never submitted to either the Incans or the Spanish, and they are an autonomous people, this group called a Kogi. And they have villages like this that are now open. You can actually go up and stay with them now. Like we went and visited the Embera yesterday, similar kind of conical houses and people, but these are living up in this higher elevation. They trade for cotton, and then they are known for weaving these gowns that are pure cotton, white, not adorned, so they live a fairly simple life. And particularly they have a custom where they have a shaman, spiritual leader, who will pick a young boy, and they will, from birth, and they will keep the child in a cave for 6 years and tell it all about the world. And then in a ceremony, they will come out and they will bring the child, little boy, into light and with certain ancient knowledge about what he's seeing. So it's sort of a very strange ritual, particularly for the boy, but it's a fairly healthy community. Again, they've defended themselves from things like COVID and all. They just closed themselves off. And but they feel that they are guardians of the health of the world. And I'll read from one of their shamans here who wrote, "We still inhabit the region and practice traditions that date back to ancient times, and our ancestral territory is limited by a series of interconnected sacred sites, of which the mountain and the sea are essential, and our mountain, Guanawindua, is the center of the universe. And the mountain's health controls the health of the entire planet. Our entire society and spiritual, cultural foundation are based in the sacred practices carried out through these traditions. We believe that the Sierra Nevada is the heart of the world, and our mamas, our spirits, are protecting our people and the whole world from destruction." Famously, there was a YouTube video of them saying that about 20 years ago. Now they've opened up and they've even made luxury thatched houses for you, so you can go up there and visit and see for yourself. Well, anyway, that's Colombia, a remarkable place, and I hope you have a good visit in Cartagena, and it's my pleasure to sail with you. Thank you very much. Right.